Hey guys, Avi here and welcome back. In the last video we covered how to use classes and IDs in our web page. Basically how to give a specific tag some specific CSS. In today's video we're going to be learning about display, namely 4 different types of display: block, inline, inline block, and none. So what I want you to do is go ahead and delete everything on your current test.html and then, or not actually everything, delete everything inside of your body tags, and then go ahead and add a div tag with an ID div1, and go ahead and put hi inside of it, and then create a div tag with ID div2, and go ahead and put hello inside of it. Go ahead and pause the video, just take a few seconds and do that so that you match up exactly like this. Alright, now that you've done that, in your style.css, you should have a div1 and a div2. Again, I've deleted all the other CSS that we had before. We're starting fresh. This is a new template. Now that you've done that, let's go ahead and get started. Now, what is the display property? What does it allow us to do? Well, display property allows us to position items on a web page, next to each other, one underneath each other, however we want. The first one we're going to be learning about is something known as a block element. Basically, a block element takes up the entire width available. If you don't know what that means, well, let's go ahead and do this. You have your div1, right? What I want you to do is give your div1 a background color of anything. I'm going to go ahead and say red. Save this and refresh, and you're going to notice that your div tag takes up the entire width of the screen. Your div tag is a block element. It takes up the entire full width, and it has a line break. So the next element, which is our div2, that is right underneath it. You see, hello could be placed right next to hi, but it's not. It's on the next line. So some different block elements that exist are header tags, paragraph tags, list tags, div tags. All of these tags, if you use them in HTML, they initially always take the entire width. Okay? What I'm going to go ahead and do is also give our div2 a background color of yellow so that you can see that as well, that both div tags take up the entire space from left to right. So initially these div tags have the display block. If I go ahead and give it an attribute, so over here if I say, I don't know, style, or I can do my CSS, that's fine. If I go ahead and say over here display block, okay, and over here display block, nothing's going to happen because these elements, these objects already have display block. It comes like that. But on the other hand, the second property that exists is something known as display inline. Inline only takes up as much space as needed. It ignores your width and height, and there's no line break. So go ahead and say display inline, and see what happens. And you're immediately going to notice that, bam, these two are right next to each other. Now, this might be a bit small for you guys to see, so I'm going to go ahead and add some CSS font size, make it like, I don't know, 60 pixels so that it's readable. Font size 60 pixels, and refresh. Okay, so that's nice and big now. You have hi and you have hello. And if I give my properties a width and a height, so I'm going to say width 300 pixels, height 500 pixels, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same for div2, you're going to notice it's completely ignored. You see, what display inline does is it ignores any sort of extra width, extra height you give it. It constrains your object so that it just fits the space required. Once you've covered the 5 characters of text for hello, there's no need to make your object wider or bigger, and that's what display inline does. So there are positives and benefits to using inline. For example, if you're conserving space, you don't want it to go overboard, you don't want it to be big, then that's what you use inline. It constrains your object, and also there's no line break. So you should have noticed with inline is that the object was placed right next to each other. That means that in your display block, we had our objects one underneath the other, but with inline, it's side by side. So the third one takes the best of both worlds. The third type of display is inline block. Now I want you to pause the video and think about what could an inline block be. Well, inline block again takes the best of both worlds. It keeps your width and height, but there's no line break, it's side by side. So go ahead and say inline block inline block, and then you're going to immediately notice that we have our height and width, but the objects are still right next to each other. And this is fantastic. If you're ever placing objects one right next to each other, you have 3 images that you want one next to the other, or 3 div tags, that's where we use display inline block. Inline block respects your width and height. As you can see, it didn't constrain our object to be something like just the hi or just the hello. No, it made our width 300 and 500 pixels respectively. The last type of display that exists in CSS, or the last thing that we're covering in this lecture, is display none. Let's say for test purposes or for CSS or animation purposes, you don't want to show an object. You don't want to show an element. That's where display none comes into handy. If you refresh, bam. Display none hides an element and there's no space allocation. There's nothing. Basically, it takes it away from the web page. So just to quickly recap the 4 different displays that we covered, the first one is display block, okay? Div tags, paragraph tags, these tags initially come as display block. They take up the entire width of the web page. So if I say display block, it takes up the entire width, but then we specify the width to be 300, so it respects that and just makes it 300. Then there's display inline. Display inline allows us to constrain the width and the height so that it doesn't even matter. If you specify in width and height, it won't even regard it. Then there's inline block. Inline block kept your width and height, but still put it side by side. So if I make this inline, you'll have, If you make this inline, you'll have one that has its width and height ignored and one that doesn't. And then finally there was none. None just hides your object, hides your element from the web page. Anyways, that was a quick intro on the display. We covered 4 properties, and I'll see you in the next video.